full court press. A new Ebola czar calls for a travel ban, anything to stop Ebola from its deadly spread. Quiet courage. Seen by some as timid, soon-to-be blessed Paul VI showed strong conviction during tough times. No end in sight. Hong Kong police clear streets of protesters only to have them return. And modest fashion. Women balance their desire to look good with their religious values. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Friday, October 17th, 2014. Good evening from Washington. Thank you for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick with your news now. And concern over Ebola and attempts to contain this deadly virus top our news again tonight. World Health Organization draft documents say the WHO acknowledges it botched its attempts to stop the outbreak in West Africa. The Associated Press obtained the draft report. The WHO cited a lack of information and incompetent staff as some reasons it wasn't able to keep the virus from spreading in its early phases. Also tonight, a healthcare worker from the Dallas hospital that's now had 3 Ebola-related cases is being monitored for the virus. Complicating matters, the woman is traveling on a cruise ship in the Gulf of Mexico and is voluntarily quarantined. Authorities say she poses no risk to the public. And we get a glimpse tonight of the first nurse who contracted Ebola in Texas as she was being transferred to the National Institutes of Health in Maryland.
We're really proud of you. Hi.
Come to Maryland, everybody.
Party Maryland.
Nina Pham is now reported in fair condition at NIH just outside of Washington. Meanwhile, the government announces a new position to combat the spread of Ebola and alleviate some of the fears, hopefully. Chief White House correspondent Suzanne LaFranchi has more tonight. Suzanne?
Brian, in response to the intense and mounting pressure, President Obama has quickly named that so-called new Ebola czar, and he will be charged with 2 primary responsibilities. One is for the health security here in the United States, and the second is to help stem the outbreak of Ebola in West Africa. White House officials say while Ron Klain does not have a medical background, he is a trusted Obama advisor with extensive political experience.
He is the right person for the job. And he is the right person to make sure that we are integrating the interagency response.
Klain, a lawyer, is a longtime Washington insider, having worked as chief of staff for both Vice Presidents Joe Biden and Al Gore.
They needed someone who understands emergency response and public health.
Representative Blackburn was among House members who grilled CDC health officials yesterday at a congressional hearing. Many Republicans are calling for a ban on travel to the U.S. from West Africa.
If you're going to control it there, then let's restrict travel. Look at what has happened with one patient. One patient. Now, say that times 10 or times 50.
Following a lengthy meeting with his cabinet Thursday night, the president reiterated his resistance to a travel ban.
If we institute a travel ban instead of the protocols that we put in place now, history shows that there is a likelihood of increased avoidance. People do not readily disclose their information.
The uncertainty of the Ebola outbreak has caused turmoil in many industries, including healthcare, transportation, and the stock market, as well as igniting fear.
It's terrifying. It's a human response.
Reverend Rob Schenck, president of the Faith in Action Mission, has been ministering to elected officials, including the Supreme Court justices, for 20 years. He encourages people to calm fear with faith.
We can simply say, very honestly, Lord, I am afraid. I'm afraid today. Help me in my fear. And we'll find that God comes to us, not only comforts us in our fear, but demonstrates his ability to relieve us of those threats that make us fearful.
Interestingly, the Obama administration is very sensitive about the term czar. They are, in fact, calling Ron Klain the Ebola response coordinator. Mr. Klain will report to Susan Rice, the head of national security, and also the Department of Homeland Security. That'll do it from the White House. Back to you, Brian.
All right, thank you. Suzanne LaFranchi at the White House tonight. And some of the other stories our EWTN News Nightly team has been covering in today's world. The terrorist group Boko Haram agrees to an immediate ceasefire, but the release of the more than 200 kidnapped schoolgirls is still being negotiated. Nigerian leaders say the terrorists claim the girls are alive and well. It could take days for news of the ceasefire to reach Boko Haram cells in Nigeria and neighboring countries. Nigeria's president told the UN last month Boko Haram has killed 13,000 civilians over 5 years. In recent weeks, Nigeria's military has been able to fend off Boko Haram fighters. A Pakistani court is upholding the death sentence of Asia Bibi, a Christian charged with insulting Islam's Prophet Muhammad in 2010. Bibi's lawyer says the decision will be appealed to Pakistan's Supreme Court. The 50-year-old mother of 5 has been on death row in isolation unit for years. She's a Christian in the majority Muslim nation charged with blasphemy, and that is punishable by life in prison or death in Pakistan. Since a moratorium on executions was enacted, Bibi's case and others like it have been lingering on appeal. Her plight has drawn global criticism from human rights activists and Christian leaders as well. In Hong Kong, police and pro-democracy students clash after authorities tried to dismantle the protest. Protesters had been cleared from the area earlier in the day, but then they returned. Police responded using pepper spray and batons on the crowd. In the last few days, police have been using dawn raids to remove protesters who then return. Some Hong Kong watchers say the cat and mouse game will continue.
The end game is nowhere in sight because the students have already indicated that they want a new formula for electing the chief executive in 2017, something which Beijing will not agree to.
The student activists oppose Beijing's decision to vet candidates for local Hong Kong elections for those deemed suitable. The protests have been going on since late September. Well, same-sex couples can now legally marry in Arizona as a federal judge rules the state's ban is unconstitutional. Today's ruling blocks state officials from enforcing a 1996 state law against redefining marriage. Arizona voters approved a constitutional amendment that did the same in 2008. Attorneys representing the state argue redefining marriage hurts the government's interest of maintaining ties between biological parents and children. Well, this weekend, another recent pope moves a step closer to declared sainthood. He was plagued by frail health from childhood, but Giovanni Battista Montini was called to lead the church through a very difficult time. The son of a middle-class political leader, the future Pope Paul VI was homeschooled as a boy. He later studied for the priesthood in Brescia, Italy, not far from his birthplace. He was eventually recruited for the Vatican Diplomatic Service, working in the Secretariat of State for more than 30 years. Appointed Archbishop of Milan by Pius XII, John XXIII named him cardinal in 1958. He was elected pope in 1963, guiding the 3 remaining sessions of the Second Vatican Council. Paul VI approached the task of implementing the council decisions with consistent, careful assessment, leading some critics to label him timid. In fact, he displayed great courage when in 1968, Paul VI issued his encyclical Humanae Vitae. Going against the tide of the tumultuous 60s, he led the church in its stand against artificial contraception. His firm support of priestly celibacy also drew harsh criticism. Paul VI later used the phrase crown of thorns in describing the mass exodus of priests and religious who were abandoning their vows at that time. He traveled extensively, addressing the UN General Assembly in New York in October 1965. And so Sunday at the Vatican, he will be beatified. And today we learn Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI will attend the beatification Mass. He was named a cardinal by the new blessed. The last time we saw Benedict in public was in September at a Vatican Mass for grandparents and the elderly. And a Nebraska couple with a special connection to Paul VI will be part of Sunday's beatification Mass, which will also close the Synod on the Family. Inspired by the encyclical Humanae Vitae, Dr. Thomas Hilgers opened the Paul VI Institute in Omaha. Its approach to women's health care combines the best of modern medicine with treatments that are in line with Catholic Church teaching. The Institute's NAPRO technology has helped many couples conceive children naturally. Hilgers calls Paul VI prophetic.
He predicted all of the sociological calamities that we've come up against with the way we treat women and the way we the divorce rate and I mean abortion. I mean everything that has occurred in some way or another was predicted in Humanae Vitae. Some people call them Paul VI's prophecies because they were so prophetic.
It brings me great joy as a woman to see other women now who understand for the first time really in the history of the world. This is the first generation, this generation really, to truly understand how their bodies work, and it's revolutionary.
The Hilders say the Institute has trained hundreds of physicians through 280 fertility care centers in the United States. Well, the Giants and Royals will play in this year's World Series. San Francisco beat the St. Louis Cardinals last night 6-3. It is the third time the Giants are in the series in the past 5 years. Well, since the American League won this year's All-Star Game, Kansas City will host Game 1 on Tuesday night. This is the Royals' first World Series in almost 3 decades. Coming up, church leaders try to steer synod discussion toward Christ and away from misleading headlines. And with winter approaching, the task of caring for the throngs of refugees in northern Iraq will only get more difficult. On Friday, October 17th, thanks for joining us for EWTN News Nightly. I'm Brian Patrick. This weekend, high-ranking church leaders wrap up the Synod on the Family in Rome. They vote on a final document tomorrow. Wyatt Goolsby is here now to summarize an interesting couple of weeks. Wyatt.
Brian, today cardinals and bishops insist that there must be more of a Christ-centric focus on the family. That's the message they want to convey after reflecting on a midterm report some say caused confusion around the world.
From Italian newspapers to mainstream American television, headlines like Vatican proposes dramatic shift on gays and Catholic Church changes its position on divorce dominated the news this week. Some bishops and delegates came back refuting those headlines. Talks today turn to adoption, biotechnology, and the use of technology to evangelize. One expert says it's just the beginning.
I would say we're not going to get closure at the end of the Synod. This is going to be a long process when the Church figures out how to speak to a secular and increasingly hostile world about the truth about human sexuality, the truth about marriage.
Dr. Rusty Reno, the editor of First Things magazine, was one of several editors of major religious publications who spoke at Georgetown University last night. They say the faithful should give church leaders credit for trying to tackle some of the toughest issues facing the family.
I do think that we should not rush to judgment. This was an extraordinary synod, and we're really looking at a year-long process. And I think what you're going to see now is a whole reflection and self-examination that's going to take place in the church, and I think that will be really useful.
A way to holiness.
Father Matt Malone with America Magazine says Catholics may disagree on many issues, but his message to the faithful, don't let the debate divide the church. He also warns believers not to put the Pope into a political camp.
We then begin to think of the Pope as merely one more political player, but he isn't. He's the vicar of Jesus Christ, in whose body we are radically united.
Sunday is the final day of the Synod. The bishops will publish a final summary of their meeting, but discussions on the family will continue over the next year ahead of next fall's ordinary Synod. So, Brian, something that individual bishops will also be talking about, obviously, in their dioceses. Indeed, Wyatt. And the Synod on the family has sparked lively debate among bishops and the faithful, and it's also kept journalists very busy. We go to Rome, where Ed Penton with the National Catholic Registers joins us. And Ed, you had an interview with Cardinal Walter Kasper of Germany. Without getting into too much detail, would you just give us an idea of the tone of that and why there's been such a stir about it?
Yes, sure, Brian. It was a very relaxed interview. I think he felt he could speak very frankly and informally. He knew we were 3 journalists there, and he just went through the mood of the Synod, what he hopes for it, and the issue of divorced and remarried Catholics, which of course is his proposal. And then he talked about, why he thought that certain Africans, you couldn't listen to them because their cultures are so different.
Well, we talked with Cardinal Peter Turkson yesterday, asked him if he felt like some of the African bishops were being sidelined because of that, and he said, no way. What do you think?
Well, I think he's probably right. Cardinal Kasper didn't mention the word sideline particularly, but he did say it was his personal opinion that they can't really talk to the West about certain cultural values, just as the West can't talk to them about certain values. So that was his opinion, and that's essentially what he said.
Yeah, the issues are very different, and that really clarifies things. So the final document should be voted on tomorrow, and I wonder what you expect from that. Will it resemble the Relatio that we saw earlier this week, or do you see some major changes?
I think it's going to be quite different, Brian, because I think there was such really an outcry about the relatio that people felt, you know, as Cardinal Burke said, it wasn't really a Catholic document. So I'm sure these last few days with the small groups have been really trying to make them, you know, more acceptable to the whole group in the synod, and I'm sure we'll see much more of a Catholic document, if you like, when that comes out, probably on Monday.
And of course, that will be debated over the course of a year and then finalized in some form next October. What has it been like for you to cover this synod? It's been a rather interesting couple of weeks, hasn't it?
It has, Brian, yeah. I mean, there's two things that strike me particularly. I've covered about 5 synods now. This one, it's very much very different because it's so contentious. The issues are so contentious. So there's far more interest in this than I've ever known in a synod. And the second thing is that it has been clearly steered in a certain direction from those in charge of the synod, which I've never seen before. I mean, usually it's left to the synod participants to really steer it in the direction that they want. This time it's come really from the Secretariat, and they've been kind of directing things in the way that they've wanted, and which has upset a lot of people. But that doesn't mean to say that nothing good will come of it. People are quite sure that there's been a lot of good in this synod.
Well, we appreciate you helping us to cover the Synod on the Family over the past couple of weeks. Ed Penton, reporter with the National Catholic Register from Rome. Thanks so much for being with us. And the Islamic State may have a new way to wage war, a makeshift air force. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights Group says ISIS is test flying planes captured from Syrian bases. The British-based group has a network of activists that have been monitoring the civil war for several years. The Pentagon says it hasn't seen evidence to back up the claim. However, an Iraqi intelligence official says his government knows of pilots that have defected to ISIS. The U.S.-led coalition has been waging an air campaign against the Islamic State for weeks in Iraq and Syria. Chris Pulaski, the Senior Director for Emergency Affairs at World Vision, is joining us. And Chris, you recently were in the area of Iraq where there's so many refugees. Give us an overall picture and maybe a story or two that really touched you.
Sure. We returned not too long ago, myself and Kant Hill, who's a Senior Vice President at World Vision. We were up in Erbil, which is in the Kurdish-controlled area, or it's a Kurdish area of Iraq. And we were able to see, well, a lot of internally displaced people and refugees. So it was hundreds of thousands. We've heard that there are over 800,000 internally displaced people and a couple of 100,000 people coming over from Syria. We saw those people.
Haven't some of these people been displaced more than once?
Oh, it's in the region. In fact, it's interesting to hear the Kurds themselves, the people who are welcoming in the refugees and the internally displaced people, have also been displaced throughout the years. So they themselves have been displaced, are now welcoming in people displaced from other parts of the country and, well, other countries.
And what about the children? Aren't they the ones most affected?
The women and the children are the ones who are most affected. In fact, World Vision works most closely with women and children. That's who we target. That's who we choose to work with in these situations.
With winter, what will this bring for these people who are basically camping in many cases with almost no shelter?
Well, that's our focus right now. So we've been doing distributions of non-food items. We've gotten tarps, and we've gotten blankets, and we've gotten sheets, and we've gotten sanitation kits. But now we see winter's coming. So our thrust right now is going to prepare people for winter. So we're working with faith-based organizations over there. We're working with churches over there. We're working with the government over there to prepare people for winter. So that involves getting tents out, helping people winterize buildings, and also working with churches to help to winterize areas in their facilities.
There are so many ethnic divides in this region. How do you work to bridge those so that you can do the work that needs to be done?
Well, World Vision, we are a Christian relief and development organization, but we work with all people. So in the region, we're working with the Yazidis, which are an ethnic and religious group over there. We're working with Christians, we're working with Shiite, and we're working with Sunni. We believe that we should not politicize aid, but we really just want to meet the needs of the most vulnerable. So that's been our focus.
So one of your partners is Caritas Internationalis. How is that working, and what do you hope to achieve by partnering with Caritas and the others?
Sure. World Vision is part of a group of 10 faith-based organizations that have come together, and we've made an agreement, and we've written down these, well, it's an agreement of how we can work together, but also we're hoping that this will push forward a peaceful settlement in the Middle East, and especially in Iraq and Syria. So we're pushing for a political solution, and then we're also working together for the physical solution to meet the needs of the most vulnerable.
Well, we appreciate you sharing your experience with us. Chris Pulaski, Senior Director for Emergency Affairs at World Vision. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Up next, we show you how some women are being fashionable while staying true to moral values. On your Friday edition of EWTN News Nightly, I'm Brian Patrick, and a group of fashionistas are hoping to ignite change on the catwalk. At a recent fashion event in Dubai, women from across the globe came together discussing a growing trend, modesty. One guest even operates a popular Instagram account, Hipsters Hijabis, which features stylish wear that doesn't show a lot of skin. These young faith-conscious women say there's a gap in the market for people who want modest pieces that are still trendy.
I want to stay as modest as I can, which is why I still wear like a headscarf. But at the same time, I like my fashion, so I like to incorporate that into modesty.
Some of these hijabi hipsters say businesses are approaching them about advertising on websites, and a few mainstream brands are slowly catering to the growing demand for conservative and stylish fashion. And to further explore current modesty trends, Catherine Zeltner speaks with a fashion journalist based in a fashion capital.
Sophia Celeste, the Milan correspondent for Now Fashion, joins us via Skype. Is modesty in?
I don't know if I would say that modest is an ongoing trend right now on the runway, but I think that compared to the 1990s when designers were sort of trying to attract customers with sort of a shock and an awe and shock factor, I think right now we're seeing many more polished looks on the runway, and that's mainly because I think that the consumer more than ever before is driving European luxury fashion. And a lot of those consumers are from key markets like the Middle East and China, where for cultural or religious reasons, they're looking for more conservative items.
You're based in a fashion capital. What are the main trends you're seeing right now?
Well, I think on the street and on the runway, there is a push towards more sartorial items for both men and women's wear. We're seeing a lot of blazers for women and men, a lot of tuxedo shirts for women. We're seeing a lot of pleated pants and skirts that are pleated with accordion pleats or plissé or trumpet skirts. So for someone who wants to dress in a more modest way or conservative way, there are definitely a lot of choices out there.
Sophia, you live in Europe, you travel extensively. What have you noticed about different cultures valuing modesty?
Well, I can definitely speak for Italy. And in Italy, unfortunately, the way you dress definitely defines you. And it's always important in every situation to put your best foot forward, whether you're on a job interview, you're meeting with work friends in the center of town, or you're meeting your future husband's parents. The way you dress is definitely important. And no matter what economic class you come from, everyone always tries to put their best foot forward.
Sophia, you did your thesis on St. John Paul II. He coins the phrase, the feminine genius. Having studied him, what do you think he would have to say about fashion and women's role in society?
Well, I think in his letter in 1995 to women, he talks a lot about the struggle for women to hold a career and to be mothers at the same time. He definitely recognizes the fact that there's a lot of discrimination against women who have a family in the workplace. And I think from the beginning of fashion and now, women who are mothers dominate the industry. I mean, Elsa Schiaparelli, the Fontana sisters, Stella McCartney, Donatella Versace, Diane von Furstenberg, these are all mothers and grandmothers. And they're definitely an inspiration and show us that they can achieve a balance between being a mother and a very successful designer. And I think that, maybe Pope John Paul wouldn't agree with, everything about their fashion or their lifestyles, but he would definitely think that they're an inspiring example for mothers everywhere.
Sophia Celeste, the Milan correspondent for Now Fashion, thank you for speaking with us.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Catherine and Sophia, and thanks for watching. Until Monday, for all of us at EWTN News Nightly, I'm Brian Patrick. Good night, and God bless you.